The air that evening carried the faint smell of rain, even though the sky had been stubbornly clear all day, the kind of blue that looks painted on, as if no cloud would dare smudge it. I remember standing barefoot in the hallway of my mother's new house in Asheville, North Carolina, my toes sinking into the soft beige carpet, and hearing the muffled thump of his footsteps upstairs. Ethan, we weren't related not by blood, but by the strange, tangled decisions of our parents. My mom had met his dad at a wine-tasting event 2 summers ago, something about soulmates late in life, and why not take a chance? 6 months later, they were married. 6 months after that, I found myself hauling boxes into this new 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch and the creaky wooden stairs that would, eventually, become a map of all the moments I wish I could unwalk. He had been upstairs when we first arrived, door closed, music faint. I thought he was ignoring me. Later, I realized he was just giving me space, or maybe giving himself space. That summer, I was 19. He was 22. And there were things we didn't say, things we didn't even let ourselves think out loud, because we had been told, in polite family terms, that we were siblings now. But nothing about us felt like siblings. It started with glances, the kind you don't mean to hold too long, the kind you only notice in the quiet moments, like when you catch someone looking at you in the reflection of a window, not realizing the glass is more mirror than clear. Ethan was difficult to describe without sounding obvious. Tall, but not the gangly kind, shoulders broad enough to make doorways look narrow, hair the kind of brown that caught gold in the sun. He wasn't overly social. He wasn't the guy laughing the loudest at a party. But when he spoke, people listened. And me? I was still figuring out where I fit. Not in this house. Not in this new version of family. I'd been to shuffled divorced parents and new marriages enough times to know the script. Smile politely. Be adaptable. Don't make waves. But underneath, I felt restless. Like my skin didn't quite fit anymore. That night, the first night that mattered, I couldn't sleep. The rain smell had gotten stronger, and somewhere out in the distance, thunder grumbled like a warning. The house felt bigger in the dark, the air colder. I found myself in the kitchen barefoot, sipping water from a glass and staring out at the porch. I didn't hear him come down. "You're up late." His voice, low, warm, startled me. I turned, clutching the glass like it was going to protect me. He was in a t-shirt and loose sweatpants, hair slightly messy, like he'd been half asleep. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Too quiet." He smirked faintly. "It's never quiet here. You just have to know what to listen for." I frowned. "Like what?" He stepped closer, resting a hand on the edge of the counter. Cicadas in the trees. The creak of the floor upstairs when the AC kicks in. The ice in the fridge settling. The house talks if you pay attention. I laughed softly, shaking my head. "You make it sound haunted." "Maybe it is," he said, but his eyes weren't on the walls. They were on me. It wasn't what he said. It was the silence after. The weight of it. That moment hung in the air like something suspended between us. He poured himself water, took a sip, and for some reason, I couldn't stop looking at the way his hand wrapped around the glass. Stupid. Ridiculous. But my heart had started that slow, unsteady climb. The kind where you know you're on a ride that's about to drop, but you don't know how far. He noticed. I know he did. His gaze flickered, then settled, not on my eyes, but on the loose strand of hair falling forward. And without asking, without speaking, he reached out slow and brushed it back behind my ear. His touch was light, barely there, but my breath caught. It should have been nothing. It should have been one of those casual, sibling-like gestures that meant absolutely nothing. But it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like the start of something dangerous. And maybe we both knew it. After that, the rules, the unspoken ones, shifted. Dinner conversations felt sharper. Jokes carried a different weight. If we passed each other in the hallway, neither of us moved aside right away. If he handed me something, our fingers brushed just a little longer than necessary. But we never talked about it. Not in words. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just craving attention in a place where I felt out of place. But then there was the night of the storm, the first one of the summer. It rolled in late, After midnight, the wind shoving against the windows like it wanted inside. The rain was heavy enough to blur the world outside, and the power flickered once, twice, before going out completely. I was on the landing with a flashlight when he appeared at the top of the stairs. The beam caught the sharp lines of his jaw, the way his t-shirt clung to his chest. "Scared?" he asked, stepping down toward me. "No, I lied." The flashlight trembled in my hand, but not from the thunder. He came closer, the faint scent of his soap cutting through the damp air. "Generators in the garage. I'll get it running." I followed him without thinking, the darkness thick around us. In the garage, the rain sounded louder, the metal roof amplifying every drop. He crouched, pulling at cords and switches, and I stood there uselessly, arms crossed, heart thudding. When the light finally snapped back on, he looked up at me and smiled. Not the polite smile he used with neighbors. Not the smirk. Something softer. Something that made me want to step closer. We didn't cross the line that night. Not physically. But something in me, in both of us, knew we were standing on it. And I couldn't stop wondering what would happen if we stepped forward. If you're feeling this moment, subscribe, like, share, and tell me in the comments, would you have stepped close in the dark or walked away? The next morning, the air was heavy, the kind of damp warmth that clung to your skin before you'd even stepped outside. I stood at the kitchen counter slicing strawberries for breakfast, pretending not to notice the faint hum of his voice upstairs. He was talking to someone, maybe his dad, maybe a friend, but the sound was muffled, distorted by the ceiling between us. Every now and then, the floor would creak above me. Every now and then, I'd catch myself pausing mid-slice listening. It was ridiculous, this heightened awareness, this constant tracking of where he was, what he was doing. I didn't do that with anyone else in the house. But with Ethan, it was like some quiet part of me was always tuned to his frequency, waiting for a sign, a glance, a moment. When he finally came down, he was barefoot, hair still damp from a shower, wearing that same gray t-shirt he'd had on last night. Only now, it clung in places from the leftover steam. "Morning," he said, grabbing a mug from the cabinet. "Morning," I echoed, sliding the bowl of strawberries toward him without thinking. He took one, biting into it, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I tried to focus on my own breakfast, but every sound, the scrape of the chair as he sat down, the faint thud of his mug against the table, felt amplified in the quiet kitchen. "You going out today?" he asked. "Not sure," I said. "Mom's working a double shift, so—" I shrugged. He nodded, chewing slowly. "I might take the truck into town later. Need to pick up some things." It should have been casual. It should have been meaningless. But the way he looked at me when he said it, like it was an invitation, not just information, made my pulse skip. By noon, the sky had darkened again, the kind of gray that promised more storms. He found me on the porch, leaning against the railing, scrolling through my phone. "Want to come with me?" he asked. I hesitated. "To town?" He smirked. "No, to the moon." "Yeah, to town." I rolled my eyes, but the corner of my mouth tugged upward. "Sure." The drive was quiet at first. The radio played low, some old indie track I didn't know, and the scent of rain still lingered faintly in the truck. The windows were down just enough for the breeze to thread through my hair. Every so often, I caught him glancing at me from the corner of his eye, not long enough to be obvious, but long enough that I noticed. At the store, we moved like we were just two people running errands. He grabbed motor oil and a pack of batteries. I wandered toward the snack aisle. But even in the mundane, there was a pull. He'd stand just close enough that his arm brushed mine when we reached for something. He'd hand me a bag of chips without asking if I wanted them, like he already knew. On the way back, the rain finally started. Soft at first, then heavier, until the sound filled every inch of the truck. The windshield wipers kept time like a metronome. "You're quiet," he said. "So are you. Maybe I'm just thinking." "About what?" He glanced over, and the corner of his mouth twitched. "You." The word hit me harder than I expected. I tried to play it off. "In what way?" He shrugged, eyes back on the road. "Just wondering what you're thinking about most of the time." "Most of the time?" I repeated, "That's vague." "Not really," he said. "I just think you don't say half of what's actually in your head." He wasn't wrong. By the time we pulled into the driveway, the rain had eased, but the air between us hadn't. If anything, it had thickened, charged like the second before lightning. We carried the bags inside. He set us on the counter. I started putting things away. That's when it happened. Small, almost forgettable, but not to me. I reached for a box on the top shelf and couldn't quite get it. Before I could try again, he stepped in behind me, his hand brushing mine as he took it and slid it into place. The closeness was brief. A second, maybe less, but I felt every inch of the space between us collapse in that moment. I didn't move right away. Neither did he. Then, like nothing had happened, he stepped back and opened a bottle of water. That night, I dreamed about him. I shouldn't have. I didn't want to. But in the dream, there was no house, no parents, no rules. Just him, standing in the rain, looking at me like he'd been waiting his whole life. When I woke up, my chest ached in that strange, sweet way that made it impossible to go back to sleep. 2 days later, it happened again, the closeness. Only this time, it didn't feel accidental. Mom had asked me to help organize the attic. Ethan volunteered too, which surprised me. The space was cramped hot, filled with old boxes and the faint smell of dust. We worked in silence for a while, but the quiet wasn't easy. Every time we passed each other, there was the faintest brush of skin, the briefest catch of eyes. At one point, I was kneeling by a stack of boxes when he came over, holding one I couldn't possibly lift. "Move over," he said. You can, but you don't have to," he interrupted, setting it down beside me. The words landed heavier than they should have. We stayed up there longer than necessary. I think we both knew it. When we finally came down, the sun was already dipping low, and the air outside was cooler. That night, lying in bed, I realized something terrifying. We were no longer pretending there were rules. We were just pretending we were still following them. If you're feeling this moment, subscribe, like, share, and tell me in the comments, would you have kept pretending or finally admitted what was happening? The attic dust still clung to my hair the next morning. I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to tame it, when I heard his knock. Not sharp, not rushed, just there. Bathrooms occupied. I called out, assuming he'd move on. Instead, his voice came through the door, low enough that I had to pause brushing my hair just to hear. "Your plans today?" I frowned at my reflection. "Not really. Why?" No answer. Just footsteps retreating. I should have left it at that. But curiosity, or maybe something else, got me to open the door and peek down the hall. He was leaning against his doorway, arms crossed, like he'd been waiting. "You want to come with me?" he asked. "To where? Does it matter?" It shouldn't have. It did. We ended up in his truck again, windows down, the smell of pine and wet earth rolling in as we wound through back roads. The air was cooler than yesterday, but the sun still pressed against my skin in a way that made me feel restless. We didn't talk much at first. He had a way of making silence feel intentional, not awkward, like we were both in on something no one else knew. Every now and then, I'd catch his gaze flick over to me, quick, unreadable, before returning to the road. When he finally turned off onto a narrow gravel path, I realized we were headed toward the lake. The lake was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt bigger than you. The water caught the sunlight in shards, and the trees surrounding it seemed older than the town itself. He grabbed a cooler from the back of the truck, handed me a folded blanket. "Pick a spot." I found a patch of grass near the edge, close enough that the water lapped at the shore just a few feet away. We sat. The air smelled like damp wood and something faintly sweet, maybe honeysuckle drifting from the trees. For a while, we just sat there eating sandwiches he'd packed. The wind lifted his hair. The light shifted across his face. And I kept thinking about how easy it was to be here with him. Too easy. "You ever think about before?" he asked suddenly. "Before what?" "Before this." He gestured vaguely between us. I hesitated. "There wasn't before. We met when our parents." "That's not what I mean." I looked at him. "Then what do you mean?" His gaze held mine, steady, but something unreadable flickered there. Never mind. I didn't push. Not because I didn't want to know, but because I was afraid I already did. Later, when the sun started dipping low, we didn't leave right away. He stretched out on his back, one arm behind his head, eyes closed. I lay down, too, the grass cool against my skin. From this angle, the sky looked endless, painted in layers of gold and soft gray. I don't know how long we stayed like that, the space between us shrinking by slow degrees until I could feel the heat radiating off him. My hand shifted in the grass, almost without my permission, until my fingertips brushed his. He didn't pull away, and neither did I. By the time we got home, the air between us was thick again, the kind of charged heaviness that made me hyper-aware of every movement. I went upstairs first, telling myself I'd take a shower, wash off the lake water, the grass, the dust. But halfway through toweling my hair, there was another knock. This time, I didn't say occupied. I just opened the door. He was leaning against the frame, damp from his own shower, T-shirt sticking to his shoulders. "Hey," he said. "Hey." There was a pause, too long for something casual. Then he stepped just close enough to take the towel from my hands. Slow, careful, like testing the air between us. I could have taken it back. I didn't. He didn't say anything. Just started drying my hair like it was the most natural thing in the world. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. The scent of his soap was warm, clean, and dizzying this close. When he finished, he didn't hand the towel back. He just stood there, looking at me in a way that made it hard to breathe. I didn't move. He didn't either. Then, as if some invisible thread finally snapped, he stepped back. "Good night." And just like that, he was gone. But I didn't sleep. Not really. Because every time I closed my eyes, I could still feel the heat of his hands in my hair, and the space between us smaller than it had ever been. The next morning, the light was strange. Filtered, soft, like the world had been wrapped in gauze overnight. I woke to the sound of rain, not the heavy, pounding kind, but a steady drizzle tapping against the window. The air in my room felt cooler, almost damp, and for a few seconds I stayed still, listening to it. There was something about rainy mornings in this house. They made everything feel slower, quieter, like time was holding its breath. I heard movement in the hallway, the faint creak of the floor outside my door, and then his voice. "You awake?" It was just above a whisper, but it felt louder in the stillness. "Yeah," I said, my own voice sounding smaller than I meant it to. The doorknob turned halfway, then stopped. "Want coffee?" "Sure." By the time I came downstairs, the smell of it filled the kitchen. He was leaning against the counter, one hand around a mug, the other braced on the edge like he'd been waiting. He'd thrown on a dark hoodie and jeans, his hair still slightly damp from a shower. I didn't know why I noticed those things in such detail. But I did. He poured me a cup without asking how I took it, and got it right. We sat at the table, rain streaking down the glass behind him. For a while, neither of us said much. Just the sound of mugs setting down, rain against windows, the occasional low rumble of thunder. "You want to go somewhere?" he asked suddenly. "In this weather?" "Why not?" I hesitated. "Where?" He smiled faintly, but didn't answer right away. "You'll see." We ended up in an old bookstore on the edge of town, the kind with creaky wooden floors and aisles too narrow for two people to pass without brushing shoulders. The air inside smelled like dust and paper, and rain drifting in through the propped-open door. I wandered toward the fiction shelves. He disappeared into another section. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of him down an aisle, running a hand along the spines of books, glancing my way like he was checking to make sure I hadn't left. At one point, we met at the corner of two shelves, almost colliding. "Find anything?" he asked, voice low. "Not yet." We stood there a little too close, the edge of one of his sleeves brushing mine. Neither of us moved back. Then someone walked past, and the spell broke. When we left, the rain had eased, but the sky stayed overcast, pressing low over the town. He drove us to a small diner nearby, the kind with cracked leather boots and coffee that tasted stronger than it looked. We talked more there, not about us, not about whatever this was, but about everything else. Music, movies, the weird customers he'd seen at his part-time job. The conversation flowed easily, but underneath, I felt again, that undercurrent. Like no matter what we said, something else was always waiting. Back at the house, the rain started again. Mom was still at work. His dad wouldn't be home until late. The silence felt bigger without them there. He went upstairs. I lingered in the living room, flipping through channels without really watching. Then I heard him call my name from the hallway above. I looked up. He was leaning on the railing, looking down at me. "Come here," he said. I didn't ask why. I just went. He led me into his room, something I'd never been in before. It was cleaner than I expected, but still felt undeniably his. Posters tacked on the walls, a faint scent of cologne, a stack of books on the desk that looked barely touched. He was holding an old Polaroid camera. "What's that for?" I asked. "Found it in the attic the other day. Thought it might still work." He handed it to me. "Take one." I laughed, but raised it anyway, aiming it at him. The camera clicked, and the film slid out with a soft whir. I set it on the desk to develop. "Your turn," he said, holding out his hand. I hesitated. "I don't want my picture taken." "Too late," he said, and before I could move, he lifted the camera and took one. The sound was louder in the small room. I felt my cheeks warm. "You're impossible," I muttered. He grinned slightly, setting the camera down. "Maybe." There was a pause. One of those long ones that could go anywhere, turn into a joke, or something else entirely. He stepped closer. Not enough to touch, but enough that I felt it. "You should smile more," he said. My pulse jumped. "Why?" "Because," he said quietly, "it looks good on you." Before I could respond, he moved past me, picking up the developed Polaroid of himself. "Not bad," he said, glancing at it. I picked up mine. The picture was slightly blurred, but my expression, that exact moment, was there, the kind of look I didn't mean to have. I set it back down. We didn't stay in his room long after that. But later, lying in bed, I realized the space between us had shrunk again, not physically this time, but in some invisible way, and it was getting harder to ignore. The next few days blurred into each other. Small errands, shared meals, quiet evenings where our parents' voices filled the space just enough to keep us from saying or doing anything we shouldn't. But the tension was there. Always. It lived in the pauses, in the way my eyes would find him before I even realized I was looking, in the way his hand would linger for half a second too long if he passed me something. It was the kind of awareness that felt dangerous, like standing too close to a flame just to see if it would catch. On Thursday afternoon, Mom left for another double shift, and his dad had a late meeting. I was curled up on the couch, half watching a movie I didn't care about, when I heard his footsteps on the stairs. "You doing anything?" he asked, leaning against the wall. I shook my head. "Just this." "Come upstairs for a sec." My stomach tightened, not in fear, but in that low, humming way that meant I already knew I was going to follow him. In his room. He was sitting on the floor, surrounded by a half-open box from the attic. Old cassette tapes, scratched CDs, and a few photo albums were scattered around him. "Look at this," he said, holding up a cassette with no label. I sat down across from him. "What's on it?" "No idea. Thought we could find out." He popped it into a small, battered player he dug out of the box. The sound that came out was warbled, a little too slow, but clear enough, some old mix of songs from decades ago. We didn't talk for a while, just listened. The music filled the room, soft but steady, and the rain outside made it feel even more enclosed. At some point, I leaned back against the side of his bed, legs stretched out. He mirrored me, only a few feet away. Our knees weren't touching, but they were close. "Feels weird," I said quietly. "What does?" "This. Being here. With you. Like this." He didn't look away. "Weird good or weird bad?" I hesitated. "I don't know yet." The song changed, slower, softer, and the space between us felt smaller than ever. I could feel my heartbeat in my hands, my throat, everywhere. Then, without thinking, I reached out and took the Polaroid he'd taken to me the other day from the edge of the bed. "You kept this out," I said. Yeah. Why? He shrugged, but his eyes stayed on mine. I like it. Something shifted in the air. Not loud, not obvious, but enough that I felt it deep in my chest. I set the picture down carefully. My fingers brushed as I did. Neither of us moved away. For a moment, that was it. Just a faint contact, the quiet, the sound of rain and old music wrapping around us. And then it happened. He reached up, almost slow enough to stop himself, and tucked another loose strand of hair behind my ear. It was the same gesture as that first night in the kitchen, but different, closer, warmer. His hand didn't fall right away this time. I should have moved. I should have laughed it off. I should have done anything except what I did, which was nothing. I stayed there, letting him touch me like it wasn't wrong, like we weren't breaking some invisible rule. And then, soft in the sound of rain, I heard him say my name. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't even a question, but it was enough to make my breath catch. He leaned in just slightly, not enough to close the space, but enough to make it impossible not to notice. My heart was pounding, my mind a mess of warning signs I didn't want to read. Before either of us could take it further, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped the moment in half. We both froze. He stood first, shoving the cassette player back into the box. I grabbed the Polaroid and set it exactly where it had been. By the time his dad walked in, we were sitting on opposite sides of the room, talking about nothing. But my skin still felt warm where he'd touched me. And that night, lying in bed, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit before. It wasn't a matter of if we'd crossed the line anymore. It was when the house was quiet the next morning. Too quiet. No clinking dishes from Mom in the kitchen. No distant sound of his dad talking on the phone. Just a low hum of the fridge and the occasional tick of the wall clock. I made coffee, stood by the counter, and watched the rain slide down the glass. Lately, it felt like the weather had been following us. Cloudy, damp, full of pauses. The stairs creaked. I didn't have to turn around and know it was him. "Morning," he said, voice still rough from sleep. I glanced over my shoulder. He was in a worn hoodie, hood down, hair a little messy. Somehow, that made him look less guarded. "Morning." He came to stand next to me, close enough that our elbows nearly touched. I felt it, that awareness that was always there now. But I didn't move. Neither did he. "You busy today?" he asked, watching the rain. "Not really." "Why?" "Come with me somewhere." "Where?" He gave me that almost smile, the one that meant he wasn't going to tell me yet. "You'll see." An hour later, we were in his truck again, heading out of town. The rain eased to a light mist, blurring the edges of the trees as we passed. He didn't turn on the radio this time. The silence between us felt heavier than the clouds. After a while, he turned down a narrow road I'd never noticed before. It wound through dense woods until it opened into a clearing. There was an old cabin there, small, weathered, with ivy climbing partway up the side. "What is this place?" I asked as he cut the engine. "Belonged to my uncle. No one uses it now." He got out, and I followed, the damp air clinging to my skin. The door stuck a little before opening, but inside it was dry. Dusty, but dry. A single couch, a small table, and a stone fireplace dominated the main room. We walked around slowly, the floor creaking under our weight. It felt different here, removed from everything else. No one to overhear, no one to interrupt. He set his keys on the table. "Used to come here as a kid. Sometimes still do." "By yourself?" "Yeah." He glanced at me. "Now with you." The way he said it made something twist in my chest. We ended up sitting on the couch, side by side, facing the empty fireplace. He leaned back, arms stretched along the top edge. I stayed forward at first, hand in my lap, but gradually, the pull between us shifted me closer. It was quiet except for the faint sound of rain on the roof. "I keep thinking about the other night," he said suddenly. I turned to him. "Which night?" He didn't answer right away, but his eyes said enough. The space between us shrank. Inches, then less than inches. My pulse was a steady drum in my ears. He reached out, fingers brushing the side of my face, slow and deliberate. I didn't move away. "You shouldn't look at me like that," he said, voice low. "I'm not." "You are." For a moment, I thought he was going to close the space completely. My breath caught, my whole body leaning toward him before I realized it. But then he pulled back just slightly, his hand falling away. "Not here," he murmured, almost to himself. We sat in silence after that, both of us pretending to look at the fireplace, neither of us really seeing it. On the drive back, the tension was almost unbearable. Every time the truck hit a bump, our knees brushed, and every time it happened, neither of us moved away. When we got home, the spell didn't break, not completely. That night, after dinner, I went upstairs and found myself standing outside his door. I didn't knock. I didn't even know what I was doing there until he opened it from the inside, like he'd been about to leave. We froze. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure it was true. For a long moment, we just stood there, too close, too still. Then he stepped aside, letting me in. His room felt warmer than the hallway. He closed the door, not locked, but shut, and leaned against it, watching me. "Why are you here?" I could have lied, said I needed something, but the truth slipped out before I could stop it. "I don't know." He crossed the room, slow, like giving me time to change my mind. I didn't. When he was right in front of me, the air between us felt like it was humming. His hand lifted, not to touch me, not yet, but close enough that I could feel the heat from it. "We're not supposed to," I whispered. "I know." Neither of us moved for what felt like forever. Then, just when I thought I'd have to step back or forward, there was a sound of the front door opening downstairs. We both flinched. He stepped back first, running a hand through his hair. "Later," he said quietly. I left his room without looking back, but my hands were shaking. Later didn't come that night, or the next, but the word stayed in my head, not just as something he'd said, but as a promise. And a promise like that doesn't fade. It waits. For 2 days, we were careful. Too careful. We spoke less. We crossed paths less, like putting space between us might erase what almost happened. But every time I caught his eyes, I knew it hadn't gone anywhere. The thing between us wasn't gone. It was just pacing. It was Saturday afternoon when it broke. Mom was away for the weekend visiting a friend. His dad was at a conference 2 towns over. The house was ours in that rare, echoing way where every sound feels louder because there's no one else to hear it. I was in the kitchen making tea when he came in. "No, hi." No casual question. Just walked in, opened the fridge, got a bottle of water. "Want to do something?" he asked without looking at me. I set the mug down slowly. "Like what?" He shrugged, taking a drink. "I don't know. Just something." We ended up outside. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the yard damp and the air smelling fresh, green, alive. The grass squished slightly under our shoes as we walked without direction past the porch toward the edge of the trees. We followed the narrow trail into the woods, not saying much. The sound of our footsteps on wet leaves was the only thing breaking the quiet. About 10 minutes in, the trail opened into a small clearing I'd never seen before. A fallen log sat near the center, half covered in moss. He sat first, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. I stayed standing, looking around. "This where you bring all your guests?" I asked lightly. "You're not a guest." It was meant as a simple reply, but the way he said it made the air shift. I sat beside him. The log was damp under me, but I didn't care. We were close enough that our arms almost touched. Almost. That word had started to feel like its own kind of torture. "You've been avoiding me," he said suddenly. "I haven't." "You have." I looked at him, ready to deny it again, but stopped when I saw his expression. He wasn't accusing me. He was just stating it. "Maybe I thought we needed space," I said quietly. "And did it help?" I shook my head before I could stop myself. He exhaled slowly, looking down at the ground. "I don't know how much longer I can do this." My heart skipped. "Do what?" "Pretend." The word felt heavy between us. I didn't answer right away. I just sat there, my pulse loud in my ears, my fingers curling against my palms. When I finally spoke, my voice was low, then stopped pretending. His head turned toward me, slow, like he wanted to make sure he heard me right. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the quiet around us thick enough to feel. Then, without warning, he closed the distance. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet, but it was closer than we'd ever been. His hand lifted to my face again, the way it had before, but this time it didn't stop at my hair. His thumb brushed along my cheekbone, and I could feel the faint tremor in it, like he wasn't as steady as he wanted to seem. The space between our mouths was small enough that one breath would close it, and maybe it would have, if not for the sudden sharp crack of a branch breaking somewhere behind us. We both jerked back, glancing toward the trees. A deer bounded away through the undergrowth, white tail flashing once before disappearing. The moment was gone, but not lost. We walked back in silence. His hand brushed mine once, and I didn't know if it was an accident or not. I didn't ask. Back at the house, the air felt different, charged, like both of us knew the line had thinned to almost nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing every small sound in the house, the wind against the windows, the faint tick of the clock in the hallway, the creak of the stairs. I sat up when I heard the second creak, then another, and then he was there, leaning against my doorway, his t-shirt hanging loose, his hair slightly mussed. "Can't sleep?" he asked. I shook my head. He stepped inside, closing the door partway behind him. Not all the way, just enough. For a second, we didn't move. Then he crossed the room, stopped beside my bed. "Move over," he said softly. I did. He sat, the mattress dipping under his weight, the space between us smaller than it had ever been. We didn't touch. Not yet, but the air between us. It wasn't just charged anymore. It was ready. For a while, neither of us said anything. We didn't have to. The quiet wasn't awkward. It was heavy, full, like the silence itself was leaning closer, waiting for one of us to move first. I could hear his breathing, slow, steady, but deeper than normal. My own felt shallow in comparison, like I didn't trust my lungs to behave if I let them fill completely. He shifted slightly, his knee brushing mine under the blanket, a tiny, accidental touch that still sent a sharp current up my spine. "You're warm," he murmured, almost to himself. I turned my head toward him. "So are you." The lamp on my nightstand was still on, casting a soft, golden light across the room. It made his hair look darker, his eyes sharper. I'd never noticed how his pupils seemed to catch the light and hold it, like he was built to look right through you. And that was the thing. He was looking right through me, like every thought I'd had these past weeks was sitting there between us, and he was reading each one without me saying a word. "Do you ever," he started, then stopped. His jaw flexed, like he was searching for the right way to phrase it. "What?" I asked. He looked down at his hands, then back up. "Do you ever feel like something's supposed to happen, and it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, because it's already in motion?" I swallowed. "Yeah." His gaze didn't move from mine. "That's what this feels like." The space between us was gone before I realized either of us had moved. One moment, I was staring at him, my heartbeat hammering. The next, his mouth was on mine. It wasn't soft at first. It was hungry, like weeks of holding back, had built into something that couldn't start slow. My fingers found the edge of his shirt, without thinking, curling into the fabric. His hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, and I could feel every inch of him against me. The warmth, the weight, the way he didn't seem willing to let go. When we broke for air, it was only for a second, just enough for him to rest his forehead against mine. "This is wrong," he said, his voice rough. I nodded. "I know." We kissed again anyway. The blanket slid from my shoulders. His hand found mine, fingers locking. Everything felt sharper. The texture of his shirt under my palm, the faint scrape of stubble along his jaw, the heat rolling off him like he'd been holding this in too long. I thought about pulling back. I thought about what it would mean if we didn't, but the thoughts didn't win. Not tonight. When he finally leaned back, it wasn't far, His eyes searched mine, almost like he was checking if I regretted it already. I didn't. He must have seen that, because his hand lifted to my face again, thumb brushing just under my lower lip like he was memorizing the feel. We didn't say goodnight. He just stayed. We talked quietly for a while after that, about nothing and everything. Old memories. Random things we'd never told each other. His voice in the dark felt different, lower, slower, like it was meant for my ears alone. At some point, I must have drifted off. I woke hours later to find him still there, breathing slow and steady beside me. His arm was draped loosely over my waist, not holding me, but they're all the same. By morning, he was gone, but the pillow beside me was still warm. The next few days were strange. Not awkward exactly. More like we were both pretending nothing had changed while knowing everything had. We still had the same casual banter, the same routines. But sometimes I'd catch him looking at me from across the room, and I'd remember exactly how his hand had felt on my neck. It was Wednesday night when the next shift came. We'd been watching a movie in the living room, sitting on opposite ends of the couch. The lights were low, the only glow coming from the screen. At some point, I stretched my legs out and my foot brushed his thigh. Neither of us moved it away. By the time the credits rolled, I'd inched closer without realizing it. He was leaning back, one arm draped along the back of the couch. My shoulder was almost under it. Almost. He looked down at me, one corner of his mouth lifting. "You're doing it again," he said. "Doing what?" "Pretending you're not where you want to be." The air thickened between us. I opened my mouth to answer, but he'd already shifted, his hand sliding into my hair. And just like before, the kiss came fast. But this one wasn't hungry. This one was slow, drawn out, unhurried, like he wanted to make sure I felt every second of it. When he pulled back, he didn't say anything. Neither did I. We didn't need to. The kiss lingered in my head long after it ended. It wasn't the kind of moment you could just shrug off, not when every nerve in your body still hummed with the memory of it. I could still feel his hand in my hair, the way his thumb had rested just behind my ear like it belonged there. We didn't move right away. We just sat there, close enough to feel the warmth from each other, staring at the TV without seeing it. When the silence finally broke, it wasn't with words. It was with the faint brush of his fingers against mine, barely there, as if he was testing whether I'd pull away. I didn't. Our hands stayed like that, side by side, until the world outside the living room felt like it had stopped moving. It was late, the kind of late where even the house seemed to be asleep. I started, but my voice trailed off because I didn't know how to finish the sentence. I should what? Go upstairs? Pretend tonight never happened? His eyes stayed on me. Stay a little longer. And so I did. We ended up lying down on the couch, me facing him, his arm tucked under his head, our knees brushing. The space between us was small. Too small for anything but honesty. "I've been trying to stop thinking about you like this," he admitted quietly, as if the dark made it safer to say. "But it's like every time I see you, it gets worse." My throat felt tight. "You think I haven't been—" "I know you have," he cut in, a faint smile touching his lips. "I see the way you look at me. There wasn't a map for this. No rule book for what we were doing. We were just in it. And maybe that's why my hand found his shirt again, curling in the soft fabric, like I needed to hold on to something. His other hand slid to my hip, not pulling, just resting there, a weight that grounded me even as my pulse climbed higher. When we kissed again, it wasn't rushed this time. It was careful, deliberate, the kind of kiss that asked questions instead of taking answers. His lips moved slowly over mine, his hand brushing up my back like he was afraid to push too far, too fast. But the longer it went on, the harder it was to keep that pace. The soft kiss became something else, something deeper. His hand trailed higher until it rested between my shoulder blades, holding me closer. I could feel the rise and fall of his chest against mine, the way his breathing matched mine, without either of us trying. We only pulled back when the need for air became impossible to ignore. Even then, he didn't let me go. "You should go upstairs," he murmured, though his hand stayed right where it was. I didn't move. "Do you want me to?" A pause. Then quietly, no. It was that honesty, that unfiltered answer, that pulled me even closer. We stayed like that for hours, the lines between right and wrong blurring more with every minute. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just listened to the silence. But the tension was there the whole time, steady and unbroken. The days that followed were a careful dance. In front of other people, nothing had changed. We still moved around each other like we always had, shared the same casual teasing, the same normal routines. But when it was just us, that was different. Our eyes lingered longer. Touches lasted a beat too long. And there were moments, tiny, dangerous moments, where we almost didn't stop. One of those moments happened late on a Friday night. We were in the kitchen, the only light coming from above the stove. I was leaning against the counter, a glass of water in my hand, when he walked in. "You're still up?" he asked. I nodded. Couldn't sleep. He came closer, opening the fridge without taking his eyes off me. Me neither. When he closed the fridge, he was right in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Faint, warm, and familiar. His gaze dipped to my lips before finding my eyes again. I didn't realize I'd set my glass down until his hand brushed over mine on the counter. That small touch turned into his palm resting against my hip like it belonged there. "Tell me to stop," he said softly. But I didn't, and that was all the permission he needed. The kiss was rougher this time, like the restraint from the past week had finally started to crack. My back pressed against the counter, his hand sliding to my lower back as if to keep me there. I felt like my entire body had been set alight, my pulse, my breath, my thoughts all tangled in the heat of it. When we finally broke apart, his forehead rested against mine. "This is going to get complicated," he whispered. I could only nod, because I knew it already had. The days after the kitchen were a blur pretending, at least on the surface. Underneath, every glance felt like a spark, every small brush of contact like a warning shot. We didn't talk about it. Not the kiss in the kitchen. Not the way his hands had felt on me. Not the fact that I'd stood there and let him get that close. It was easier to hide behind silence. Or maybe it was safer. Sunday night. I was in my room, lying on my bed with my laptop open, but barely watching the movie playing. The house was quiet. My mom was away for the weekend with friends. His dad was on a late shift. The stillness had a weight to it. I didn't hear him knock. I just felt the door open, the faint sound of it clicking shut again. When I looked up, he was leaning against the frame, one hand in his pocket, the other running through his hair like he wasn't sure if he should even be here. "You're ignoring me," he said finally. I closed the laptop. "I'm keeping my distance." "Because of the other night?" His voice was low but steady. "Because I don't know what we're doing," I admitted, "and I don't know where it ends." He came closer, slowly, until he was standing at the foot of my bed. "Maybe it doesn't have to end," he said. That sentence, those 5 words, sent my pulse up in my throat. I sat up, tucking my legs beneath me. "You don't mean that?" His jaw tightened. "I do." There was a long, heavy pause before he climbed onto the edge of the bed, not touching me yet, just sitting close enough for me to feel the heat radiating from him. "I've tried," he said quietly, "to tell myself this is wrong, to stop thinking about you like this, but it's not working, and I'm done pretending." My breath caught. "Do you know what you're saying?" "Yeah," he said. "I'm saying I want you." It was too much and not enough all at once. The way he was looking at me, steady, unblinking, made me want to move toward him and away from him at the same time. "Tell me you don't feel the same," he said, "and I'll walk out that door right now." But I didn't say it. I couldn't. Instead, I reached for him. It was small at first, my hand against his cheek, the roughness of his stubble under my fingers. But the moment I touched him, his breath caught. And then there was no more distance. The kiss hit harder than the others. Not in speed, but in weight. Like we both knew what this meant now. His hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, deepening the kiss until my head felt light. I could taste the faint trace of coffee on his lips, feel the heat of his breath between each break. When his hand moved to my thigh, my pulse jumped. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't careless. It was deliberate. a slow press of his fingers, tracing the line of my jeans, as if mapping the path to somewhere we both knew we shouldn't go. I should have stopped him. I didn't. We broke apart only when we heard a noise from downstairs, the faint creak of the front door. My stomach dropped. "My dad," he whispered, pulling back just enough to put space between us. I scrambled off the bed, my heart pounding so loud I swore it could be heard down the hall. The next morning, we didn't talk about it. He didn't bring it up over breakfast, and I didn't ask. But the air between us was heavy, loaded with everything that almost happened. We both knew the truth. We'd crossed the line the moment we stopped pretending we didn't want to. That night, I found myself in the living room again. The lights were low, the TV flickering with some show I wasn't really watching. When he walked in, I didn't move. "Thought you were going out," I said. "Changed my mind." He dropped onto the couch beside me, not close enough to touch, but close enough to make my skin hum. After a minute, he leaned back, his arm resting along the back of the couch, a casual move that still felt like a silent invitation. I took it. I didn't even think about it. Once my head was against his shoulder, his hand slid down, brushing my arm in lazy, slow movements. "You're making this harder," I murmured. He smiled faintly. "Good." We sat there like that for a long time. The kind of long where you lose track of how much time has passed until you realize the house is silent again. And then, without a word, he turned, his hand finding mine, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "Come with me," he said quietly. I looked at him. "Where?" "Upstairs." Something in his tone told me he didn't mean it the way most people would. This wasn't about sleep. This wasn't even about talking. It was about deciding. And I knew, without asking, that once I followed him upstairs, there wouldn't be any going back. I didn't answer him right away. Didn't move. Just sat there, my hand still in his, my mind screaming at me to think, while my body was already leaning toward him. His thumb brushed over my knuckles again. Slow, measured, like he knew every heartbeat was bringing me closer to saying yes. The living room felt suddenly too small, too charged, like the walls were closing in. "I don't," I started, then trailed off. "You do," he said softly. "You just don't want to say out loud." The worst part was, he was right. I wasn't afraid of wanting him. I was afraid of what came after. But when he stood, still holding my hand, and tugged gently toward the stairs, I didn't pull back. The climb felt longer than it ever had before. Every creak of the steps seemed louder. Every shadow stretched longer in the dim light. At the top, he paused, not letting go, just looking at me like he was giving me one last chance to turn around. I didn't. His room was dark, except for the faint glow from the streetlight outside. It cut a pale line across the floorboards, and his silhouette moved through it like something pulled from a memory I shouldn't have. When the door shut, the sound was final. He came closer, slow, like he was giving me time to stop him. I didn't. His hand found my waist first. Not rushed, not greedy. Just there, holding me in place like he was anchoring both of us. "I've been trying to be careful," he said quietly, "but I can't do that anymore." The words landed heavy. I reached up, my fingers brushing his jaw, feeling the tension there. He didn't break eye contact. And then his mouth was on mine. It was nothing like the kitchen kiss. This one was deeper, slower, heavier, the kind of kiss that wasn't just about lips, but about everything we weren't saying. When his hand slid higher, under the hem of my shirt, I felt every inch like a spark against skin. I should have stopped him. I didn't. We moved together without speaking. The kind of wordless understanding that comes from knowing this was the moment we've been circling for weeks. The streetlight caught the edge of his face when he pulled back just enough to look at me, breathing hard. "Say it," he whispered. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear my own voice when I did. "I want you." That was it, the thing he'd been waiting for. He kissed me again, harder this time, and I felt us both giving into something bigger than hesitation. Clothes became less important, not in a frantic way, but in that slow, deliberate way where every layer feels like permission. The air between us was hot now, charged, like the room itself knew what was happening. By the time I was on his bed, the space between what we'd been and what we were now had completely disappeared. His hands were steady, his movements sure, like he'd been thinking about this as much as I had. There was no rush. Every touch felt like it was meant to be remembered. When his mouth moved to my neck, I couldn't stop the sound that escaped. Quiet, but enough for him to pause and smile against my skin. "This okay?" he murmured. I nodded, pulling him closer. We didn't talk after that. There wasn't anything left to say. When it was over, we didn't move right away. His arm was around me, my head against his chest, both of us breathing in sync. It was quiet, except for the faint sound of cars passing outside. I should have felt guilty. I should have been thinking about what this meant, about how complicated things would be now. But all I could feel was the warmth of his skin, the way his fingers traced slow circles on my shoulder, like he didn't want to let me go. "You know there's no going back now," he said finally. I knew, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't care. The clock on his nightstand glowed 2:14 a.m. I had no idea how long we'd been there, only that the night felt endless in a way I didn't want to end. When I finally got up to leave, he caught my wrist. "Stay." It wasn't a question. And even though I knew staying would only tangle us deeper, I slipped back under the blanket beside him. His arm pulled me in like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was heavy and dreamless. The next morning, the light was different. I woke first, the weight of what we'd done settling in slowly. But when I turned my head and saw him still asleep, I felt that pull all over again. Whatever this was, we crossed into it completely. There was no more pretending. No more almost. Just us, and the line we'd left far behind. The first thing I heard was the sound of the house settling, pipes groaning somewhere in the walls, the faint hum of the fridge downstairs, and then the steady, slow breathing beside me. It would have been easy to pretend it was just another morning, that nothing had changed, if it weren't for the fact that my body still remembered every place he touched me. He was still asleep, one arm thrown loosely over his eyes, the other resting between us, like he'd fallen asleep mid-thought. His hair was a mess, the kind of mess that came from my fingers, threading through it hours earlier. I should have gotten up right then, slipped out before anyone noticed, made the whole thing vanish into quiet. But I didn't move. The clock said 8:02 a.m. Too late for safety. Downstairs, I could hear footsteps. Light ones. Not his. Not mine. It hit me like a jolt. She was home. I sat up quickly, pulling the blanket around me. He stirred, squinting against the light. "What?" His voice was rough, still half asleep. "She's here," I hissed. That woke him. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, running a hand down his face. Okay, just... He glanced at the door, then at me. "Bathroom. Go now." I scrambled for my shirt, nearly tripping over my own shoes in the process, and slipped out into the hall as quietly as I could. The house smelled like coffee and toast. I kept my head down, moving fast. Halfway to the bathroom, I heard her voice, light, casual, the same voice I'd heard 100 mornings before. But now it made my chest tighten. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, heart pounding. The mirror didn't help. I looked exactly like someone who'd done something she shouldn't have. Flushed cheeks, hair hopelessly messy. I splashed cold water on my face, willing my pulse to slow. By the time I opened the door again, the hall was empty. Back in my room, I shut myself in and sat on the bed, trying to think. We hadn't talked about what would happen after. Hadn't made any rules. Hadn't even said if this was anything. And yet, last night didn't feel like something that could just be undone. A soft knock at the door made me jump. I opened it just a crack. He was there, hair damp like he'd just showered, wearing that same unreadable expression I'd seen 100 times. Only now, I knew what was underneath it. "She's in the kitchen," he said. "Act normal." I almost laughed at how impossible that sounded. We went downstairs together, but didn't walk side by side. The air felt strange, like we were both trying to erase the closeness from a few hours ago. She was at the counter, pouring coffee, smiling when she saw us. "You two are up late," she said, teasing without knowing how sharp the words felt. He answered for both of us. "Yeah, Stayed up too long watching movies. I sat at the table, staring at the plate of toast she slid in front of me, pretending it was just another morning. But every time he moved, reaching for the milk, brushing past me, I felt the memory of last night like a physical thing between us. The rest of the morning blurred. She talked about errands. I nodded at the right moments, and he barely looked at me. It wasn't until later, when I was alone in the backyard, that I heard the screen door click shut behind me. He came out, hands in his pockets, scanning the yard before walking over. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I shrugged. "Are you?" He gave a small, humorless laugh. "Not really." We stood there in the sunlight, both pretending we weren't thinking about last night, and failing completely. "She can't find out," I said finally. "I know." It should have ended there. But instead, he stepped closer, close enough that the warmth of him was impossible to ignore. "I don't regret it," he said. "I just don't know what happens now." Neither did I. And that was the problem. Because the second he said it, I knew this wasn't going to be a one-time thing. The rest of the day was an exercise in avoidance. Meals together, but not together. Passing in the hall without touching. Eye contact only when absolutely necessary. But that night, when the house was quiet again, I found myself standing outside his door. I didn't knock. He opened it like he'd been waiting. We didn't talk. We didn't need to, because we both knew whatever line we crossed last night, we weren't going back. The first few days after that night were the hardest. Not because of guilt, that never came, but because of the constant, suffocating awareness of him. Every room I walked into, I checked first. Was he there? Could anyone see us? It was a strange kind of double life. At the breakfast table, we were barely more than strangers, trading the occasional look, speaking only when necessary. But behind closed doors, in the quiet corners of the house, we were something else entirely. That week, I learned a dangerous truth. Secrets have weight. They live in the way your voice tightens when you answer a casual question, in the way you stand just a little too far from someone. Not because you want distance, but because you're terrified of what happens if you don't. It was Thursday afternoon when the first crack appeared. I'd just come back from a coffee run, juggling a cardboard tray of lattes in my bag. He was in the living room, sprawled on the couch, scrolling through something on his phone. She wasn't home. The second the door closed behind me, he was up, took the coffees from my hands, set them on the table without even looking. His hands found my waist like they'd been waiting there all day. I let the bag slide to the floor. We didn't speak. There was no pretense now, no awkward hesitation. It was the kind of kiss you can't fake, the kind that tastes like the whole world could end in an hour and you wouldn't care. We didn't hear the car in the driveway. The sound of the door opening was like ice water down my spine. I shoved him back just enough to break the kiss, our breathing too loud in the stillness. She stepped into the living room a moment later, holding grocery bags. Her eyes went straight to us. I told myself it was fine. We were standing a safe distance apart now. But I knew the look on my face didn't match the story I was about to tell. "You're back early," he said smoothly, taking a step toward her to grab one of the bags. "Traffic was better than I thought," she replied, still looking between us. Her brow furrowed, just slightly. I took the coffees from the table, pretending to be busy. If my hand shook, I hoped she didn't notice. The rest of the evening passed in fragments. She made dinner. We ate. No one mentioned anything. But I could feel it. The shift, the faint, invisible thread of suspicion weaving itself between her glances. That night, in my room, I texted him. "Me, she knows. Him, no. She suspects. That's different. Me, not for long." He didn't answer after that. But I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound of footsteps in the hall. The next morning, I caught her watching me. Not in a casual way, in the way someone studies a puzzle they can't quite solve. And that's when it hit me. We were running out of time. The secrecy that had felt intoxicating now felt fragile. One slip, one wrong look, one word out of place, and everything would come apart. I told myself I could handle it, that I could be careful. But later that day, something happened that proved I was already wrong. It was raining by the time I got home from errands. The house was dim, the air heavy with that after-storm smell. He was in the kitchen, back to me, sleeves pushed up, rinsing something in the sink. He turned when he heard me, and for a second, we both forgot to play our parts. It wasn't a kiss this time. It was just the way he looked at me, like he was still tasting last night. And, of course, she walked in at that exact moment. This time, there was no pretending she didn't notice. Her eyes flicked between us, her mouth opening just slightly, like she was about to ask something. But instead, she just said, "Dinner in an hour," and walked out. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "That's twice," I whispered. "I know." For the first time, I saw it, the worry in his eyes. It was small, but it was there. That was when I realized something. I wasn't afraid of her finding out because of what it meant for me. I was afraid because of what it might do to him. We didn't touch again that day, or the next, but the space between us didn't feel like distance. It felt like waiting for the moment when this quiet game would finally explode. The confrontation didn't come the way I expected. It wasn't some screaming match, or a slammed door, or an accidental confession in the heat of the moment. It was quieter than that, and somehow that made it worse. It was a Sunday, the kind where the sky stays gray all day and you feel it in your bones. I was in the kitchen, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, when she walked in and said my name, not in the casual way, not in the way you call someone for help carrying groceries. It was the other way, the way you'd say it if you'd been practicing in your head first. I looked up. "Can we talk?" She didn't wait for me to answer, just turned and walked toward the dining room. I followed because what else was I supposed to do? She sat at the table, fingers laced together, and for a moment, she didn't speak. Just studied my face like it held all the answers she'd been looking for. "I'm not going to dance around this," she said finally. Her voice was steady, but I could hear something under it, something tight, almost brittle. "I've noticed things between you and him." I froze. Every excuse I'd rehearsed over the past week suddenly vanished from my mind, leaving nothing but the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. "I don't know what you think you've seen," I said carefully. It wasn't denial, not exactly. More like a weak attempt at buying time. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing just slightly. "I've seen enough." The words hit harder than I expected. She didn't have to elaborate. We both knew what she meant. I opened my mouth to speak, to say something, but that's when I heard it. The faint creak of the hallway floorboard. He was there, leaning against the doorway, expression unreadable, watching us like he'd been listening for a while. Her gaze flicked toward him. She didn't look surprised. "Maybe you'd like to explain it to me," she said, her voice cool now, the kind of cool that hides heat beneath it. He stepped into the room, pulled out the chair across from her, and sat down like this was just another dinner conversation. "I don't think there's much to explain," he said quietly. "We care about each other." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Care about each other? Is that what we're calling it?" He didn't flinch, didn't look away. "Yes." There was a pause. It stretched long enough for me to hear the clock in the hallway ticking. Then she turned to me. "And you? Is that what you call it?" I swallowed hard. My instinct was to protect her from the truth. But the truth was already here, sitting between us like a loaded weapon. "Yes," I said. And once I'd said it, I didn't look away. Her lips pressed together. She nodded once, almost like she'd expected this all along. "You realize what this means, don't you?" she said. Her tone wasn't angry anymore. It was tired. "We're not hurting anyone," he said. It came out more defensive than I think he meant it to. She shot him a look. "That's where you're wrong." And then she stood. No yelling, no threats, just walked away, her footsteps fading down the hall. We sat in silence for what felt like forever. Finally he spoke. She's going to tell him. The him hung heavy between us. The one person whose opinion could break this apart completely. What do we do? I asked. His eyes met mine. We decide if this is worth it. There it was. The choice. Was it worth the risk? The fallout? The permanent shift in the family we'd known? I thought about the way his hand felt at the small of my back, the way his voice softened when it was just the two of us, the way every second apart felt like holding my breath. Yes, I said finally. It's worth it. Something in his expression changed. Not relief exactly, but something steadier. He stood, came around the table, and offered his hand like we were sealing some kind of pact. I took it. That night we didn't touch. We didn't need to. We just sat in my room. The door cracked open, listening to the rain start again outside. In the morning, there would be fallout. In the morning, there would be conversations that couldn't be undone. But for now, we just let the world stay quiet a little longer. And maybe that was the real crossing the line. Not the first kiss. Not the nights we couldn't keep our hands to ourselves. But the moment we both decided we weren't going back.